Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Can you see the text? Okay. Is it better now?
It's the same. I have to make it bigger. Just a minute. I don't know how to make it bigger, but I can see it. Now it's bigger. You can make it bigger. I see. Okay, now it's very big. Make it a little smaller. Make it smaller. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I made it smaller.
Oh, that's fine. You'll have to make it bigger as you discuss it. It's fine.
I only see the top of your hair. Okay, there you are.
I don't know how to get it to the beginning. Hey, you can see me now.
I can see you.
How do you get to the beginning? I'm not at the beginning
In the beginning of what?
of the
Page?
screen. Oh, now you're at the beginning.
I didn't have the screen on there. Okay. Yep. Oh, we got one. Marilyn.
Needs to put on her audio.
Good morning, Dana. President Trump is promising retaliation for that ISIS attack that killed 3 Americans.
Apparently your audio's on now.
Yes.
Hi.
Marilyn, did you attend Ezra Nechamia classes before? I'm pretty bad at remembering. I can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself or.
No, she's not muted. Oh, we can see your video, but not your audio.
Still can't hear you. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, now we can hear you. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah to you.
Where do you live?
Ainsley.
Hello.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Okay.
I see you have an engineer there.
It's not me.
I need a
Not you.
teenager. You have one available?
Hello, Andrea.
Okay.
You know, I once.
Oh, you're in the shul, huh? You're the
Yeah.
you're the
They're
secretary.
in the shul. He's on.
Like,
Yeah, but I'm gonna pin his video.
like,
Actually,
Okay.
let me pin his screen share.
putting the-
Hold
Okay.
on, remove pin. Let's not do that.
Yeah.
What we wanna do is switch to
Light
shared
rail.
content. There we go, perfect. Okay, good. All right, do you want me to mute everybody but you? Rabbi
Not
Phil?
yet, I don't think. I think later, but not yet.
Okay. Well, I was gonna go back to the office, so.
Okay.
Hi. You have a
Maybe
real
Kevin,
job.
you want to make you co-host? So that you could be in charge of the muting and unmuting? Or,
That's
Sure.
a good idea.
okay. Perfect.
Tell the people that are
Okay.
in the room to come forward because then we will be able to see them. I
Yes.
can't see them all the way back.
Okay, okay. Perfect. And we hear you loud and clear, so that's great. Okay.
Here we go, Wall.
You hear me, but I'm on a different computer.
Okay. Let's get started.
Your introduction, Rabbi Chelst?
Yeah, okay, let's go around. I'm Rabbi Chelst. Just ask my wife. She's the reason I'm here.
It's a pleasure having you teach again, even if it's long distance.
All right. Okay. And I miss Boca's weather. We have a few inches of snow on the ground in New York.
They have
Okay.
a lot of rain here this.
All right. So my apologies for not being able to do this in person. When I scheduled this a long time ago, I hadn't thought through all of my retirement, and I didn't fully appreciate what it would mean on January 1st when I lose my healthcare coverage. So that means I have to check in with every doctor I've ever seen in my lifetime to make sure I'm still put together. And not long ago, I broke a few bones, collarbone, ribs, pinky. Turns out you have to see 3 different doctors who specialize in the above the neck, one about the ribs, and one about the pinky. They won't even talk to you about the other parts of your body. So I have still lots of appointments. And next week I'll finish them up, but the final week I'll be in person. Okay, we've been learning Ezra and Nechamia for quite a while. There's some need to do some review, and I'm trying to do it as fast as possible. But to give it a framework, my main way I'll be presenting it is I'll put Ezra and Nehemiah's roles in parallel so that we can see how different they were. Okay, so the history, the vast majority of people, as we talked past, are not familiar with the history, in part because Chazal came up with a story, but they have a message, and it wasn't. We have a pretty good record of who the kings were in those days. So 10 years before the destruction, this is based on Tanakh, Nebuchadnezzar captured Jerusalem. He plundered the temple. At that time, Yirmiyahu was a prophet. He was not well liked because he recommended that in the middle of the battle they should surrender to Nebuchadnezzar. Not a good idea walking around Yerushalayim saying, we need to surrender. At that time, 10,000 leaders were exiled to Bavel, and among them were Yecheskel and Daniel. So Yecheskel, Daniel, and Ezra and Nehemiah were contemporaries, and Yirmiyahu. There's a famous prediction of 70 years. Most people think the 70 years refers to how long the base of Mikdash would be destroyed. That's not what Yirmiyahu said. Yirmiyahu specifically talked about the leadership of Bavel. And that Bavel would only be in power for 70 years. Okay, then they destroyed the temple 10 plus years later. Yirmiyahu is there watching and writing Eicha. Ezekiel had predicted the exact day that it would happen, but he wasn't there. Now, in the time period, we have some very interesting things from Sefer Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu wrote a letter of support for the Jews of Bavel, and he told the Jews of Bavel, just like someone might say to America, you are the future of the Jewish people, not the people living in Israel. At that time, the people living in Israel thought they were great. They were still there. Yirmiyahu said, no, the future lies with the Jews in Bavel. And he had 2 baskets of figs, one basket that was deteriorated and one that was in good shape. And he said, the Jews of Bavel are the basket of figs that are in good shape. It ended in the national homeland. That's why Gedaliah was so important. That's the end of the state of Israel as we knew it. Ezekiel was a prophet in Galus, and he had an unusual role that was not duplicated with any other Navi. His main role was not criticizing. His main role was giving the Jewish people above all hope that it could continue, and that God would be there with them. So that takes us through his predictions. Okay, eventually Cyrus comes to power. And the book of Ezra begins. Now, chapter 1 of Ezra that talks about Cyrus, that's not when Cyrus actually came to power. He came to power more than a decade before, but he hadn't yet conquered Bavel. So when the book of Ezra begins, that's when Cyrus has conquered Bavel. And this book begins 50 years before Ezra makes Aliyah. So one of the things I've mentioned the last time, Ezra did not lead the Aliyah. He played no role in the Aliyah other than 50 years later, he brought another 1,000 people. Maybe so Book of Ezra begins 50 plus years before Ezra makes Aliyah. It's at the 70 years of the end of Babylonian rule, and Cyrus, who is described as a servant of God, authorizes in writing return of exiles to rebuild the temple. Specifically, he only authorized the temple. He did not make any authorization for any other aspect of the state of Israel. He didn't talk at all about Jerusalem, and therefore his vision had nothing to do with the rebuilding of the state of Israel. It would not be till Nechamia that the concept of rebuilding the state of Israel would begin to have meaning. Right. 70 years of Babylonian rule, Cyrus authorized in writing. It fulfills the prophecy of Yirmiyahu. Now, in that first chapter, we see the first group of people who went. And when we learned it, I tried to parallel it to the Aliyah that started in the late 1800s. Approximately 40,000 people, but over 42,000 people made the Aliyah. They had Sheshbazzar and Zerubbabel as their leaders. The people who went decided on their own, just like now. Who comes on Aliyah? Some person or family or children decides they're going to make Aliyah. There was no superstar rounding people up. It was self-chosen. And Ezra actually recorded the names of the families who returned. It was that important that it should be remembered for all time which families had come back. These people were self-chosen, except for maybe Sheshbazzar and Zerubbabel. And they make the journey to Yerushalayim. Again, Ezra's not there. Sheshbazzar and Zerubbabel are the leaders, but no one would remember their names. And there's not much fanfare. And they come to Yerushalayim. And when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, they build an altar. No temple, just an altar. The Gemara has to discuss, can you have an altar without a temple? Obviously, you could. And if you want to understand the temple or the altar, just spend a couple of years reading Zvachim, and you'll understand it maybe. What they did is they started, laying out a foundation of the temple. Imagine they created this rectangular box that they were going to build on. And as happened with the Jews in Israel, the neighboring people were very unhappy about what was going on. And they stopped, they made threats, and they wrote to the king later on, I want Artaxerxes, I'm not sure how to pronounce these, and they put it in such a way that the Jews are always going to rebel. That's what they do. And they're planning on building a state, and they're going to rebel. Artaxerxes had his people doing research in the history of the Jewish people in Israel, and he discovered the Jews typically led a rebellion from Israel. So he supported cessation, and the building of the temple completely stopped. They suffered economically. and they lost whatever hope they had. Oops. Okay. Sometime later, sometime quite later, um, again, it's Haggai and Zechariah are the Nevi'im of that time. That's already with Cyrus has been gone. And he convinces the people to restart the Mizbeach, the building of the temple, which is about 20 years later. Then again, the people aggressively pursued Darius, the king, and he tried to convince them again. The first, what's the term for the people who try to influence the president? They're called paid lobbyists. It turns out in the Sefer, they describe that the residents hired lobbyists to constantly speak to the leadership of Persia to convince them to not let any building go ahead. This time, Darius reviews the historical record with some more guidance, and he overrules the local objections, and they can start building the Beis Hamikdash. They took them 4.5 years. Not too long. And you'd probably need to get an environmental permit. It would take you probably just as much time. 1 month later, they celebrated Pesach, and that, if you go through Tanakh, you'll see every time there's a major start or change in the thread of Jewish history, it begins with Pesach. Obviously, the first one, Moshe delayed crossing the Jordan until just before Pesach. He could have crossed it at any time, but the decision was made he would wait till Pesach. And in addition, Moshe did not allow the Jewish people in the wilderness to bring a Korban Pesach. So they brought the first Korban Pesach and the second one, and they had it Pesach Sheni. But there was after the Cheder Egel, Jews were not allowed to bring a Korban Pesach. The Medrash says because they were traveling. That can't be the reason, since for 38 years out of 40, they stayed in one place. It's just that God wanted them to start fresh, and the Jewish nation starts fresh with Pesach. And they had a major celebration. Okay, so before Ezra came, is this too small?
No,
Okay. So again, the motivation was strictly to build the temple. And Cyrus believed that was what? Somebody?
Just pointing out that you're now moving to page 2 on the handout.
Okay, on page 2 of the handout. And again, just to make it clear, there's a pre-Ezra time period in the book. Ezra does not show up until chapter 50 of his book called Ezra. The king provides all the financial resources to enhance the temple. He authorizes the original Aliyah to recruit people. And he returns the utensils that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple. A group starts traveling. Sheshbazzar is given responsibility for all the utensils from the original Beis Hamikdash. He travels with a corps of 42,360 people. There were also slaves, over 7,000, and then there were male and female singers, which drives modern rabbis crazy. How in the world were there female singers? Okay, so the later commentaries on Tanakh start giving answers. They were to sing while they were traveling, to give them something to take their mind off of it. The people returned were organized by family or ancestral cities. Yes, I'm from New York, but I don't live my life hopefully as a New Yorker. in certain parts of the world, what city you came from, the city was what's called the city-state. So it was important what city you came from. The Palestinians say the same thing about their lifetime. They want to return to their cities. And the text in Ezra describes exactly where the people went, describes which cities they repopulated, and mentions which families were repopulating. And it goes through a whole long list. And Rabbi Angel discusses why a whole parak, and it happens 3 times in Ezra and Nechamia, a whole parak is dedicated to the names of the people who were active in the rebuilding of the state of Israel. I believe the major answer is that the first Aliyah and the second and later on was driven by individuals. That was an important message for the Jewish people in history, and that's exactly what happened in the 1900s. There was no mass movement with a charismatic leader. There were some charismatic leaders, but it was basically people returning and going to finding different locations where they wanted to set up shop in different cities. The authority that Ezra had, he received a letter and he collected donations. He was allowed to collect donations. And the king sends out a message. Any of you who really want to go to Israel, to Jerusalem, I encourage you to go. When they got there, Rosh Hashanah was not too far into the future, and when Rosh Hashanah comes, the people on their own initiative come to Jerusalem and they offer korbanos on the altar. They celebrated Sukkot. They started bringing daily sacrifices. They started building foundation for the temple. Sure. Many of you have been in parts of the Jewish world where people are constantly building, and the first thing you lay is this rectangular foundation. And when the Jews saw the rectangular foundation, the young ones were super excited. The old ones cried. And the reason they cried, they saw how big the temple was going to be, and it didn't even remotely approach what Shlomo HaMelech had built. The non-Jews came and said, we'd like to help you. We'd like to participate. And it was going to be a magnificent building to help, maybe. Zerubbabel rejected all help in building it. And it relates to what is the ultimate halacha with regard to accepting help from the non-Jews. In the modern state of Israel, there was a major debate about whether to accept help from the Christians. In the early stages, the vast majority did not want Christians helping us. Later on, my friend Michael Eckstein created this conference for Christians and Jews, and he accepted. The real fear was there was going to be an attempt to proselytize. Eckstein said that was not going to be the case, and we've had a growing support of fundamental Christians. But the people around them, exactly the way the Arabs behaved after the Jews came back, they accused the Jews of planning a rebellion, and with the temple as a centerpiece. And they eventually got to Artaxerxes, and he essentially stopped the construction. So on the next page, I took some psukim from Ezra because I wanted it. Now again, remember, Ezra's showing up 40 years later. I wanted to see what does the book of Ezra, which Ezra wrote, how is he described? And that explains his mission. So the first description is, he, Ezra, Alami Bavel, came up from who's Sofer, Mahir, B'Toras Moshe. And the word sofer was basically the term for a teacher. You didn't have a book unless somebody wrote it. So the sofer was a teacher of those days. And that's the description of him. Not long after that, in verse 10, Ki Ezra hechin livavo, he prepared his heart. Lidrosh es Torah Hashem v'lasos v'lamei b'Yisrael chok u'mishpat. So the first thing described him as an expert in the Torah. The second one says he was seeking to observe and teach the laws and rules of Israel. It's the reason, his commitment to teaching is the reason why there's this Medrash says if Moshe hadn't given the Torah, Ezra would have been worthy to give the Torah to Klal Yisrael. And the reason is because he was a teacher par excellence. And then he gave him a broader mandate. He's commissioned by the king and his advisors to regulate Judah and Jerusalem according to the laws of your God, which is in your care. So he had authority over religious law. For much of history of the world, the Jews, if they were treated well, were given responsibility for supervising their own community, including their laws. Now, a few psukim later, and King Artaxerxes says, whatever request Ezra the priest, a scholar in the law of the God makes of you, be filled quickly. Or his authority extended with the king behind him to everything in religious. And then it says, and you, Ezra, by the divine wisdom you possess, appoint magistrates and judges to judge all the people, the province beyond the river. Okay. Abram Yarden does not mean across the Jordan River. It's across the Euphrates. We know the laws of your God and teach those who do not. And the Gemara debates when Ezra traveled, he came with 1,000 people. Were those 1,000 people among the best that were in Babel? Or no, they were not among the best, and they needed strengthening, and Ezra was envisioning them being strengthened by going to Israel. And with this came the right to punish, including death penalty, corporal punishment, and confiscation or imprisonment. The main point, though, there is absolutely no description of Nechamia in the book of Nechamia about who he was, what he does. I mean, we know what position he held, but there's nothing that says he was an expert in X, Y, Z. The book, the modern commentary that was written by, I'm drawing a blank again by his name, Zakheim, he felt it was important to write a book, a commentary on Nechamia, by somebody who was at the highest levels of the federal government in the United States, to appreciate what it would mean to have somebody like Nechamia in the powers that be. So Zakheim was the Assistant Secretary of Defense. He's most famous for killing in the 1980s the Israeli project called the new plane, the Lavi. It was a waste of money, and he killed it. Okay. Moving on to third. So now we see Ezra. 56 years after the first Aliyah begins the story of Ezra. Most people who've not read it typically believe that Ezra was there very quickly after the temple was started. Unfortunately, Ezra himself says it wasn't that case, but that doesn't matter. Okay. As I said, his whole motivation was to rebuild the temple, and the term Yerushalayim is never mentioned. The king provides the resources, and the travelers, we talked about how big it was. When Ezra went, he had very little idea of what he was going to find. He had made no effort to find out how things were. He recruited 1,000 people to go with him. Question is, who were these 1,000? That's debated in the Gemara. He stopped at a river on the way, and he discovered that he didn't have any Levium. It's like in Shul, when they say any Levium, and nobody stands up to take an Aliyah. It's a lot harder to find Levium than his Kohanim. So he's missing him. He arrives. There's no fanfare. Nobody welcomes Ezra. He's there for 3 days. And all he does is, and this is quite unusual, he was very strict to account for everything that the king had given him to bring to Eretz Yisrael. So he recorded it, and he had, one of his first things was to recount everything that was there to show that everything he was given was there. The locals offered to help rebuild. This is not under Ezra, this is before Ezra. And the work was halted 15 years until King Darius. Now, what was Ezra? He partially reversed the problem of intermarriage. He is credited with the idea of reading the Torah in public. He reduced the status of the Levium at the time, and he created a Sefer HaYuchsid. That principle carried all the way till the time of the Gemara. One of the Gemaras I learned with Rav Soloveitchik was the last parak in Kedushin, and it starts with Asar Yuchsin. There are 10 levels of people, and they go through them. Okay. And this will, okay. So Ezra had no starting point. He just decided one day, he heard that things weren't great. He was going to lead a journey into Yerushalayim. He had no specific mandate. Nechamia was very different. When he was told by friends and colleagues and family members that the community in Israel was suffering, and it was a spiritual failure, he then prayed to God for guidance, specifically when he approaches the king. So this is similar to Esther approaching the king in the book of Esther. He approaches the king after he's already received an eyewitness report. And the report describes that the walls are in shambles, and he prays for the strength to rebuild Jerusalem. He has to get permission of the king, and in his case, it was not just the king, it was the queen as well. And he framed it as, he wasn't building Jerusalem, he framed it as his ancestors were buried around Yerushalayim. He wants to fix up their graves. Ezra had no military support in his journey, and neither Tammy.
Can I ask a question? When Ezra came, was there a Beis HaMikdash?
Yes, there was already a Beis HaMikdash. It was probably a little smaller than Young Israel Southfield, and a lot smaller than Torah.
And did they use the same Mizbeach that they had built before they had a Beis HaMikdash?
Yeah, the Mizbeach that was built is what they used. They didn't change that when they built the temple. But the temple was nothing special. And we know what the end result of the temple was after Herod fixed it all up. I don't know, I have not read or seen material that describes what was the temple like in the time of the Maccabean? How big was it? We know they had a menorah. That's about it. I don't know anything else about it. Anyone out in the audience have any idea what the temple was like at the time of the Maccabean? Don't all shout up at once.
Just that
Okay.
there was a menorah.
Right. That's it. Okay, so he has a military escort. Ezra specifically said, I don't want a military escort because I am protected by God. I don't need a military, and I'm not going to ask for help. Nechamia was not like that, and he was the secretary to the king, and he requested a military escort. He was the leading member of the royal cabinet. It was called the cupbearer, which might have been Mike, the Secretary of State. But in the book of Nechamia, we have no reference in the early days that he was involved in the Jewish community. Nothing. He comes with a letter. The letter is written to the governors to governors along the way for safe passage. And he makes one specific request. In the description of what was going on in Jerusalem, they said, not only the walls broken, but there are no doors. And so he put in a request that he be allowed to get wood from the king's forest to build that. Ezra did not bring any Jews with him. He actually only had this military escort. Ezra at least brought 1,000 with him. In his first 3 days, Ezra was very quiet, didn't say anything other than accounting for his resources. In the first 3 days, Nechamia makes it clear that nobody should even notice he was there. And it's an interesting dynamic. He then goes out in the middle of the night and he needs some help, but he walks around, his team walks around the walls of Yerushalayim, recording every gap in the walls. And when he presents his presentation, the people agreed to rebuild it. Now, clearly, he's talking about Yerushalayim. He had no statement about the temple. The temple was already there. It wasn't anything tremendous. Okay, and remember the temple's construction or the work. It was protests stopped the construction, and we see that in Eretz Yisrael right now, and there are two strategies. Let's just start building, make facts on the ground. Let's not worry about whether or not we have permission. That's how Nechamia went to build the walls. He didn't get further authorization from the king that he was building the walls. Okay. That was quick review of Ezra and Nechamia. Okay. We already started some basics. In Nechamia, I'm just going to point out the one. His focus was on building the wall, and he had armed guards. It's what's happening right now in the state of Israel to debate about whose responsibility was it. Ezra had the people who built the wall, had people standing next to him who had their weapons drawn, ready to fight. And during the whole time of building the wall, that was the way it worked. They did it on a rotation. It was the first recruitment of soldiers. And Nechamia had a brilliant strategy. He assigned different walls to different people. Right? You had a right to put your name on your part of the wall. And the way he allocated the walls, he looked at where people lived and who was closest to the section of the wall, and they then built that section. They would have a specific interest in that. Okay. And that's what they took on. Okay. Any questions? Hopefully this was some value, that it wasn't all just stuff you'd heard
I
before.
thought one of the reasons for the wall was that on Shabbos they shouldn't come in and have market. Wasn't
That's
that?
later.
Oh,
That's later. Yeah, Nechamia will eventually deal with the core problems. We'll spend one class on all the things that he worked on and why he worked on them. We'll also talk a little bit about intermarriage, which is somewhat strange. That one of the biggest problems in Aliyah at the time was intermarriage. What did Nechamia work on first? Of all the things he could do besides the wall, families came to him complaining about their peers who are the wealthy people in the community who were stockpiling all the wealth. And here they are building this wall, and the wealthiest people who had their houses in Jerusalem were benefiting from it. Our flesh is as good as the flesh of, we are as good as our brothers. But because of poverty, they were being sold into slavery. Some were sold to non-Jews. The vast majority were working as slaves, Jewish slaves to the compatriots. And especially concerning was that some of the girls were the Jewish female slaves. So he complained to the people. They complained to Nechamia, and this is how he responded. So this is our first sense of what type of person Nechamia was. Okay, it angered me very much to hear their outcrying these complaints. So his first reaction is anger. After pondering the matter carefully, I censured the nobles and prefects, saying, "Are you pressing claims on loans made to your brothers?" And then he raised a large crowd, and eventually they canceled out the debts. One of the brilliant things in the Torah is the concept that every Shemitah year, all of certain debts get canceled to break the stream of poverty that always going to be wealthy people amassing large amounts, and as a result, some subset becomes impoverished. So here's what I want to do for the last 10 or 15 minutes. Ezra, let's see what happened with regard to intermarriage. Whereas Nechamia started on an economic problem that was brought to his attention, this is the next page. Ezra's first effort was people came to him, he didn't discover it himself. And he said the people, the priests, the Levites, have not separated themselves from the Canaanites, the Hittites, and so on and so forth. They have taken their daughters as wives for themselves and for their sons. And then when he heard it, he did acts of shiva, which I guess is where the custom became that if a child of yours was proselytized, the family sat shiva. That was a state of being. It was including the leaders. And it's a phenomenon that we've seen throughout the history of the world, and especially in the United States. The largest percentage of people who intermarry are the leaders of the Jewish community. Leaders in some sense. I still remember going to a yeshiva dinner, and somebody who was planning on talking about intermarriage had to be told, the person we're honoring is intermarried. So that was a challenge. He got people together, he got them excited, and the end result was he got people to publicly announce they were going to divorce their wives. And as best we can tell, despite the way the book of Ezra makes it sound like he was super successful, there's no doubt he wasn't too successful because Nechamia had to do the same thing. So if he had really been successful, and Nechamia only arrived within 5 or 6 years after Ezra. So you have the priests, the high priest, the children of the high priest, all intermarried. When did Nechamia find it? It wasn't when he first showed up. When Nechamia went to Israel, he got permission from the king and queen with a promise that he would return. He returned, it doesn't exactly say, looks like it was after 10 years. He took a return trip to the capital, and this is what he saw when he came back. Also at that time, I saw the Jews had married Ashdodites, Ammonites, Moabite women. Okay? Then comes a very interesting next statement. A good number of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, the language of the various people, and did not know how to speak Judean. The idea that the children could not speak the language of the culture of the country was really frightening. Ben Yehuda made this decision with regard to the state of Israel and accomplished the impossible, that Israel would need a language of their own, and it wasn't going to be Yiddish. Yiddish might have worked for the Eastern Europeans. It wouldn't have done much for the half of the Jewish population that were in Africa and the Middle East. Now look at what Nehemiah's response is. He was very mild. I censured them. Okay. I cursed them. Next. I flogged them. I tore out their hair, not unlike Ezra, who tore out his own hair. He tore out their hair. And he, in the name of God, said, you shall not give your daughters in marriage to their sons, or take any of their daughters for your sons and yourself. Now, this is the last chapter of Nehemiah. This is the last chapter completely. And then in verse 26, it was just in such things that King Solomon of Israel singed. Unlike Ezra, he gives a context for why he's so concerned about it. Among the many nations, there was not a king like him, and so well loved was he by God, and God made him king of Israel, yet fire and wine caused even him to sin. Okay? It's something I've talked about repeatedly. Most people who study Tanakh do not realize how extreme Shlomo Melech was. He built an idolatry, a temple for some idols that stood on a hill overlooking the Beis Hamikdash. So his proud Beis Hamikdash was towered over by one of these temples to some god. Now the Gemara tries to say, well, he didn't really mean it. It was all his wives. That would be great, except God didn't say that. God simply said, you're not worthy of being a king anymore. I would take it away right now, but I liked your father, but your children won't inherit, and led to the division of Israel and Judah. It was just in such things that King Shlomo sinned. Among the many nations, there was not a king like him. Okay, I just read that. Now then, can we acquiesce in your doing this great wrong, breaking faith with our God by marrying foreign women? In general, although there's some debate, the assumption was, other than the Shiva Amamim, the 7 nations, there was no biblical prohibition about marrying a non-Jew. It had ramifications that were beyond just whether the marriage was not valid, but there was no explicit prohibition. So there was even one less barrier to intermarriage. And as we know seen from the American record, there's always an advantage of marrying into the leadership of the community, the non-Jewish leadership of the community. And he goes on. Now, this is Nehemiah wrote this. One of the sons of Joiada, son of the high priest, okay, we're talking about who intermarried. Elisha was a son-in-law of Sanballat. Sanballat was the arch enemy of the Jewish people. And he was Jewish, no likelihood, or I drove him away from me. Okay. And then 29, remember to their discredit, oh my God, how they polluted the priesthood, the covenant of the priests and the Levites. I purged them of every foreign element and arranged for the priests and Levites to work each at his task by shifts. This is the next to last verse at the end of all of Tanakh. So the last paragraph of all of Tanakh is about intermarriage. And we talk about intermarriage now. Obviously, it's a major sin. It was not unique to our time. Okay. Okay. I haven't allowed for much questions. Next time we'll have a little more text so we can have anything in particular. It's too late now, but did I spend too much time reviewing, or was it all known to you? Or was this a good way to review it by comparing Ezra and Nechamia?
Did the divorced people remarry after the people became Jewish? Did they
Okay,
become Jewish?
so it doesn't say anything. One of the things that Zackheim says is that Ezra, in the time of Ezra, the announcement was, I want you to divorce your wife right away, kick them out of the house, have them take the children. It seems like that happened. He claims Nechamia never asked for that Nechamia was focused only on the future, do not marry or intermarry in the future, but didn't say anything about kicking out the wives, figuring that would be an easier task than asking people to divorce. It's not clear that many of those may have converted. It's to our sadness that the process of conversion as it exists now in the state of Israel is a corrupted version compared to what it was originally intended to be. It was not intended to be as, I can assure you, Rus never studied Shulchan Aruch before she converted. She did not know all the laws of the Torah, didn't know laws. And where they came up with this idea that you can convert until you've mastered a significant portion of the laws is a radical shift. And that I would get on my horse and complain vehemently about it. So let me start with that. So I don't know that whether they remarried. Ezra makes it sound like they divorced and that was it. Doesn't really say anything about individuals. Anyone else besides my wife, she can ask me. She's in the room next door.
Thank you, Ken. Feel better? And we look forward to seeing you live when you get back.
Okay.
Have a happy
Sorry.
Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Thank you very much.
Happy Hanukkah, Tammy.
Bye.
All right.
Okay. Everybody heard it well? Yes. Oh, that's great. Wonderful. All right, so now it's going to be a very interesting course. Rob and I invited this class will be afterwards in here, so I'm assuming more people will come in person next week. Thank
thank
you,
you.
Rabbi.
Thank
We'll see
you,
next week.
Andrew.
I hope you're recovering well.
Okay. I'll continue to go to the doctors and say they can't do anything for me, but don't worry, you'll.
Yeah. You will heal eventually. I had the same thing. I told you I fell
Oh
off
no,
my
you told me
bike.
about your bicycle ride.
Yeah, it takes a while to heal, that's all. What can I tell you? All right, I'm gonna end the class.
Yeah.
And thank you also to your wife for her assistance.
Okay.